Hey, my name is Mary, and I am going to talk to you about my testimony of how I came to know Jesus and how he became the Lord of my life. It has been a process, as it probably is for most people. I knew of God from the time that I was very young. I have a memory of being in my bed and being terrified of dying and of my parents dying. And calling out to God in just desperation, just not knowing what else to do. My parents were asleep and they weren't answering the knocks I was knocking on their door, so I'm just by myself and I'm really terrified. I'm in the dark and I just remember being so scared and feeling a sense of like peace come over me that I could not explain. There's no reason that I should have had this amount of peace that completely settled my soul and my spirit to the point where I could go to sleep and I did not have these fears anymore without a single person talking to me, ever explaining anything of God's sovereignty, of who he was, of what heaven was. I just had like a download of a sense of he was in control and that he had me and that I was safe. And I remember that from a very young age. So I knew that God was a lot. I knew that there was a God. I just didn't fully understand all the details. And so as I grew up in the church, my family was Catholic, and we were like Shiite Catholics. We were there every Sunday. We never missed. I was an altar server. I was a reader. I was singing. I was the president of my youth group, like super involved as a Catholic girl. The most you could probably be involved within that church. So to me, I was doing all of the right things and pursuing God in what the ways that I knew how. But I always felt kind of like a second class Christian when I would talk to other friends. They'd be like, "Oh, well, you're Catholic, though." Like they would like kind of speak down to me, and I'm like, "What? Like, what do you mean? I'm doing way more things than you're doing." Like these other Christians, they weren't going to retreats and to youth groups and to all of these things that I was doing, and yet somehow they saw me differently. And as I progressed in my faith, I started to see some of the reasons why, and I didn't understand things about the Catholic Church as I was there, talking with the priest about why we were praying to Mary or why we were praying to the saints, and why couldn't I go just directly to God, and that I just didn't understand why they seemed to be so much closer to God, that their relationship looked like something unattainable when I felt so close to God, like that I also could talk with him in that way, and just different things about the Catholic Church that didn't make sense to me. Um, and so to take a step back, while I was in, when I was in ninth grade, I actually heard the gospel presented very clearly at a meeting after school. There was a motivational speaker who had come to our high school and then invited kids to come after. And so I ended up giving my life to Christ that night. And it was very real. And I stood up in front of all of my peers and walked to the front of this sanctuary. And we ended up getting ushered into another room where we started filling out paperwork. And so that kind of left me confused because no one spoke with me. I didn't have a Bible. No one explained what it looked like to walk with Christ. So I kind of was left without any direction. Didn't have mentorship or discipleship during that time. And so my high school years, I just was a good girl. I think most people would have saw me as that. I was doing, youth group and was going on retreats and doing all these things that were pursuing a relationship with God. But then I also would go to parties and hang out with all the athletes. I played soccer, all varsity soccer, all 4 years. So I hung out with the party crowd when I could. And I would go to these parties and I would just want to have fun without drinking because for whatever reason, probably the Holy Spirit, not because anyone was teaching me this, but I would want to show them that they didn't have to drink to have fun. So I kind of was just like a wild card, like riding, mats down grassy knolls in the middle of the night and just being ridiculous and jumping out of cars and all this stuff. I was crazy. And so I really feel like it was the Holy Spirit that was guiding and directing me to not jump fully into the party scene, but to still be a light within it. But I didn't have enough wisdom or direction to actually like keep myself from being too much involved. So I would try my best to not drink, to not do the things, but eventually when you're putting yourself in those positions, you're going to slip up and you're going to become more like the people that you're around and less of the light. You start to be dimmed by just the people that you're around. So that I feel like was happening to some degree. And then going into college, here I was the one who gave the benediction at our graduation. Like everyone saw me as this Christian girl, even though I was Catholic and was kind of seen as a second class Christian. I still was like, had that kind of a reputation. And so then I'm in college in the summer before college had even started, and I go to my first ever like fraternity party with a roommate, and she ends up leaving me for some guy, so I'm there by myself. I don't know where she is, and the cops show up, and we end up scattering into rooms and have to sit there for a long time. And I had been drinking some little hunch punch, whatever they had there, but we sat in this room for so long that I felt completely like sobered after sitting there. But I'm just looking around at all of these people, and I'm like, this isn't who I want to be. I don't want to be associated with this party scene and with this drunken group of people. But I 100% was like, that is exactly who I was. And I would be labeled as an underage drinker at this party, like fraternity type of a crowd. And in my head, I'm like, oh, but I'm not like them. Like, I could always somehow separate myself as being just a little bit better. Like, oh, well, I go to church or I do this, so I'm not really like them. But I was like them. That's exactly who I was. I was at the party, I was drinking, I was in the rooms. So I end up getting the nerve to leave. As soon as the cops leave, I drive home. And to get to where my dorm was, you could like throw a rock to it. It was really close to where this fraternity house was. And so I'm driving, and no more than when I turn out of the parking lot, they're just waiting for us to leave apparently, because boop boop, the lights come on, they pull me over, and I can see my dorm. Like, it's, I should have just walked. I don't know why I drove, but I did. And he pulls me over, and I get out of the car, and he's giving me the breathalyzer. He's having me do like all the tests, and I am bawling, and I'm so upset because I am thinking, this isn't me. This isn't who I am. Like, I can't even imagine if the people in like high school knew this was happening to me. They wouldn't believe it. But really, that's exactly what I was doing. I just thought that I could be on like the line. Like, I could just dabble in the party world. I could just dabble in being, you know, whatever, with the cool kids, and then also be this Christian. And I didn't realize how you cannot be both. Like, it's lukewarm when you're in the middle. And God says that he will spit you out when you're lukewarm, to not be hot or cold. And so here I am doing all these things. I'm crying, and he's telling me to, you know, walk the line. And I just, my whole like life is flashing before my eyes. Like, I'm about to get a DUI. Like, what is happening? I can't imagine. And so then, as he is waiting for like the test results, I end up blowing like a .002 or something really low. So it's basically like Dimetap, but enough to show that I had alcohol. So I end up getting my license revoked for 6 months, but I didn't get a DUI. Thank the Lord. But it was all I needed. Like, it literally was like I had just started to veer off the path, and God's like, whoosh, like, get back. Like, what are you doing? And so it really woke me up. And I'm sitting there with the cop, and I'm like, thanking him, like, thank you so much for pulling me over. You don't understand. Like, this is changing my life. Like, I want to go to this church that someone invited me to. Like, you should come. And he's looking at me like, who are you? Like, why are you thanking me? But it really was what I needed. And God knew exactly what I needed to wake up to the fact that I was living in sin, that I was living this double life, thinking that I could be whole and I could be set apart and yet be in the world fully. And so I'm telling this to the cop, and he's like, yeah, I want to come with you. What church is it? So we're talking about church. So I end up going home and getting on my dorm room floor, and I just lay flat on my face, and I'm bawling, and I'm telling God sorry for all of the ways that I have veered from him and how I have tried to live this double life. And it just really woke me up to the sin in my life. And so that was the moment that I would claim as like my rededication to Christ. I believe that I was saved as a freshman in high school, but that really was when I grabbed hold of that truth and really turned from what I had been living, because I didn't understand the consequences of sin. I didn't understand that I couldn't be both. And so I would say from that point on, then I really got plugged into a church that was in the area. A girl in one of my classes had invited me to just a non-denominational church. And the first time that I went, oh my word, like, I'm at a Catholic church my whole life. I'd never been to any other church. And I go into this church, and it felt like God's presence like hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, it was so thick, because the people in this congregation were all filled with the Holy Spirit, were set free from the bondages of their past. Like, they had gone through all these processes of healing, and they were just overflowing with God's love. I had never experienced anything like this, and they worshiped him unashamedly, and they just were pursuing God with all of their hearts. And so it was like a breath of fresh air. I had never experienced this level of intimacy with God. I'd always worshiped God. I've been to church my whole life, but I didn't understand how intimate my relationship with him was meant to be. And so it really was what awakened me to who he is and what I wanted my life to be about. And so I just got plugged in, and I did get mentored there, and I got a Bible, and I read this Bible for hours. I mean, just ferociously, because I had never read a Bible. I'd been in churches my whole life, and I'd never just sat and read a Bible. And so I could not get enough, and I loved every minute of it. And I feel like it's been a continued process since then, where God just is layer upon layer of new revelation, and he has been so gentle and sweet with me as I have gone and fallen and tried to put on my old clothes and tried to go back into the world, and he has to remind me quickly, like, that is not where I need to be. And so I am just so thankful for the people in my life that have brought me to know him, that through invitations to um, different groups, and for a public speaker to come to middle high school and speak the gospel. And so I am doing my small part of sharing what God has done in my life, in case you are someone who grew up in the Catholic Church, or you're straddling that line right now where you're in the world but you're also in church and you're trying to reconcile the two. um, it it can't be done. You can't be in the world and be fully set apart for God, because just like I'm reading in all of the Old Testament right now, every time that God called his people, he wants us to be set apart. He doesn't want us to worship him and be involved in all of the worship that's around us in this world. And so there's a lot of pagan worship things that are out there, and there's things that are just worship of ourselves, of our own desires, of our own wants, of the things that make us happy. And there's so many things that can distract us from who God is and from what he wants us to be. And so I am continuing to learn this. I have not arrived. I am far from being who he wants me to be, I think, but it's a daily dying of self. It's a daily realigning myself with who he is, and not allowing the world to entice me into doing the things that feel good and that seem fun, or that will last for just a short minute. Because even all the times that I spent in the party world and going to clubs and going to parties, it's so broken and it's so lost, and the people are so hungry for something more. And so my heart still goes out to those communities, because I think that we are meant to insert ourselves into every community, just like Jesus did. He would go and hang out with the prostitutes and with the brokenhearted, and that's how they come to know who Christ is. But I was trying to do it as someone who had no training, who had no concept of the gospel, had no idea how to actually remain firm in my own faith and witness to other people. And so if you are new in your faith and you're wanting to reach back right now to all of your friends that are in it, I would suggest that you give yourself time to just get mentored, to be discipled in who God is and what he wants for you, and what a life devoted to him looks like, so that you then can go in prepared. Because I was not prepared and tried to swing myself in and out of the world, and it can end up leaving you battered a little bit. So I hope that this encouraged you, and if you have any questions, or you want to reach out to me and you want to talk about any of the things I shared, I would love to do that. I will talk with you later. Bye-bye.